Nothing is more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers you hire. That's why I started First 10. Hi, I'm Boris Epstein, CEO of First 10, and with me is my colleague,
Alexis Munger. Hi. At First 10, we work with early founders to help build early engineering teams.
And this is the First 10 podcast, where we bring you valuable insights on building early engineering teams from all sides of the equation. Engineers, founders, even investors. On today's episode of the First 10 podcast, we welcome Eddie Siegel, the brilliant mind behind Fractional AI. Wow, how cool is it to talk to Eddie? He has such a unique vantage point and so immersed into what's actually being built in AI. What really jumped out is the hype versus substance spectrum that he spoke about, right? Like how much hype is AI versus how much substance is actually being built. And, Eddie leading Fractional, which is on the inside of such a broad range of companies building AI.
Yeah.
I mean, he's way more skewed to the substance scale, which is exciting. I mean, there's some very exciting product and applications and progress that's being made with AI. And it's really cool to hear Eddie talk about that and validate that.
Yeah, I agree. I think his team in particular is getting the chance to see things from a vantage point that most probably won't, even inside of tech. But I think, we hear a lot about AI and, oh my gosh, it's going to do all these things. And I think, right now you hear a lot about like the dark side of it, but I think that there is a light side. And I do think that, that they've really identified this niche sort of area or specialization within AI where there's all these companies that have all these things that are super manual and time intensive, and they're not in a position to do anything about it themselves. So this is where a company like Fractional can come in and really solve and work on some really interesting problems in that space and just make things much more efficient. And rather than take somebody's job, help them do it faster and better. I think that's cool.
Yeah, plus one on that. I think of Eddie as a true tech visionary, someone who intricately understands the rhythm of building a thriving company from the ground up. Eddie's not just a coding maestro, he's a serial entrepreneur who's navigated the startup world with incredible success, taking companies like Wove from fledgling idea to successful acquisition. Now, with Fractional AI, he's tackling one of the biggest challenges companies face today, harnessing the power of AI. Eddie's a leader who deeply understands the importance of a strong engineering culture, and he's a mentor who champions talent. I'm excited to deep dive into Eddie's world and get insider perspective on the future of AI and what it means for founders and engineers just starting out. Eddie Siegel, welcome to the First 10 podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great for you to be here.
Yeah, thrilled to be here.
Let's start this off on a little bit of a weird note.
Oh, nice. I like weird.
What's the weirdest question you've ever asked an LLM? And what answer did you get?
Well, there's one circulating right now. This one's gone like fairly viral. I definitely did not come up with this myself, but people are asking LLMs for intuitive insights about themselves. What have you learned by interacting with me?
Oh,
I wish I could actually remember the answer. I found it insightful and immediately forgot about it. But I do think they have this sort of way, or like on the topic of interviewing, sometimes my style is to take these very sort of stream of consciousness style like notes for myself. And they're really like not ready to go share with other people. The sort of trends aren't thought out.
yeah.
And at some point I was trying to get an LLM to go through a series of my notes and produce some kinds of summaries that I could put into our internal tracking system. And I'd gone through a series of these and I'd gotten it tuned to produce output I liked. And then I just asked it to kind of summarize my style so that I could use that in a prompt to a future LLM to be able to replicate it. And it had this whole dissection of like all of my style, all the things about me that I felt like were really like almost a little too insightful. I had to kind of back off and be like, I don't know if I want to know all this about myself. That's fine.
Wow. It's like too much of a mirror for me.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. I'm curious, what is something the world doesn't yet know about AI, but you think will soon?
So much real stuff is happening inside of businesses that people might otherwise not think of as being super cutting edge or super sexy businesses that like is actually moving the needle. I think there's a lot of conversation where people are still wondering, is this real? Is it going to be useful? Is this hype? And then if you go look on the insides of incumbents in basically any industry you can think of. There are massive needle moving projects happening right now in a way people don't fully appreciate, I think.
Yeah, that's really cool. And because I think too, like, I don't know about you, but I hear a lot of this, like, it's going to replace us and take all of our jobs. But then there's that side of it that I wish people knew more about.
Yeah, I was concerned about that going into this business, that, implicit in the idea of sort of automating something is that, you might end up eliminating some jobs. I think our track record so far is 100% of projects we've done are in production or currently in development on the path to production. There's a lot of these high value sort of workflow automations going on. I don't think we've done a single one that has resulted in anybody's job getting eliminated. Instead, it just looks a lot more like freeing people up to do less grunt work and to do higher value things. They move on to the next, the higher leverage thing to do. Or they're like, I wish we could, as a team, get 10x more done than we're getting done today, but we can't 10x the size of this team. That's just like logistically impossible. And now they can get 10x done with the same team.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I guess on the scale of hype or not, how much hype is AI versus how far from hype is it?
I mean, in a lot of ways, the founding story of the company is like that we're generally skeptics of these kinds of sort of like hype cycles, waves of enthusiasm in Silicon Valley. Not that there's never any real substance behind them, but I think, we have a way of sort of like, the premise of venture capital is to imagine, like, if it works, how big can it be? It's not necessarily machine designed for figuring out, like, how likely is it really to work? And so, like, we were sort of like fairly crypto skeptical, for example. This feels like the first one of these waves I can remember in my career where it seems very real. It feels like living through, the invention of the internet or something like that, where there's like very real change happening. Now, of course, like, the dot-com boom was also a thing. And like at any time when you have one of these significant shifts, there is some level of hype to it. And there's going to be some frothy, like, use cases that are not grounded in actual real, fit with a real market. And so, of course, there's going to be some silly things that when we look back, we're like, I can't believe we did that during this moment of crazy hype. But I think it's a very real transformational shift that's happening.
It definitely feels that way to us as well. It feels like kind of being back in mid 90s when the internet first came onto the scene.
Yeah, I lived through some of that stuff as maybe a user, but not as a builder. It feels very cool to be in the middle of actually helping build this stuff.
Yeah, it must be super fun from the lens of getting the chance to build a cool startup. So tell us your brief overview of your story, right? So you graduated from UPenn and here you are today building Fractional AI.
Yeah, so I met my co-founders actually on the early team at LiveRamp. So I originally, I joined LiveRamp as an intern when I was still in college. Then came back and joined full-time on the engineering team. I'm a software engineer by background. I've been programming since I was 10 years old.
Wow.
And joined LiveRamp first as an engineering intern, then as an engineer, then eventually became VP of engineering of this division that we kind of spun off and sold. And that's where I met who eventually would be my co-founders at Fractional. So one co-founder is Chris Taylor, our CEO. He was the top performing salesperson at LiveRamp. And so that's how we met. And then Travis May, our third co-founder, who he also started as an intern, but eventually became CEO.
Wow.
Hard to get a better trajectory than that.
Yeah.
And so we all had kind of intersecting and winding paths from there. Like I after LiveRamp started my first company. Chris shortly thereafter joined. And so we worked together on what eventually became Wove, which we spun off and sold. And I think by this time, this is like, Chris and I have now worked together like 4 or 5 times. And it's been pretty continuous since I think like 2013 or 2012 or something. And Travis was CEO at LiveRamp, then went on to found this company called Datavant, which he's since had this, mammoth, home run sort of exit from. And then it was earlier this year that we started kind of getting back together and talking to each other about like, is there some way to team up and do something else together? And I think to your question before about, hype versus not hype, what we kind of realized through those conversations was like, we all had the same feeling. This is like, wow, I really believe in this one. But then we started thinking about like, so if there's going to be this massive kind of amount of value unlocked in the world, what's the right way for us to kind of participate in that? And all 3 of us come from venture-backed product backgrounds, right? We're product people, and started trying to think through, these various product ideas for products we can build to help or to participate in this whole movement. And the answers were like really not obvious to us. Like everything we could kind of come up with had some scary combination of like, you have to kind of bet on where the technology is going. You have to kind of bet on being a new entrant and somehow beating out incumbents, which I think is very, very challenging to do in the places where AI is going to win. And I think we really realized like a huge pocket of where this value is actually going to be is going to be successful existing companies with strong market positions that had things that were not automatable, 5 years ago that are now.
Yeah.
Where they're doing lots of manual paperwork or people-powered processes that are somehow limiting their growth, limiting their ability to scale, or they're costing them tons of money. And that 5 years ago, that was just the way it worked. And then now that's not so true anymore. But those projects, now that they're sort of, those things are automatable, that doesn't mean they're easy to automate, especially right now, and there's sort of no playbook for this thing. And a lot of those companies are also the companies that don't have the kind of access they want to have to great talent. And, if it takes a really, really high caliber engineer to do this, where are they going to sort of get access to that? And so that's how Fractional was born. And I do believe that, like, let's take for an example, like somewhere in the healthcare world, you're a revenue cycle management company, and your job is to like appeal denied insurance claims, right? So 5 years ago, what does that look like? It's a bunch of people writing appeals letters to insurance companies. Actually, probably still today, that's how it works. And you can imagine how AI is going to make that so much better, right? Like that whole industry is going to change. Like AI can be drafting and writing these letters for you at a bare minimum. If not, like maybe this whole process should change, right? The insurance companies are also going to employ this technology in some way. But just because it's going to change, A, doesn't make it easy, and B, like, who would you rather be in that scenario? Do you want to be the new YC company coming around being like, I'm going to change the world of revenue cycle management? Or do you want to be the incumbent that has, a decade of experience and has hospitals as customers and knows how to appeal these denials and lives in the flow of data? You're already integrated and have all these historical, medical records and things like that. I definitely want to be that incumbent. I think that's part of why it's really challenging to build an enduring, large scale product company in this space, or at least predict where there's going to be product company winners.
Interesting.
Yeah. Super cool. And I in talking to other engineers about Fractional, and that's kind of something that I highlight to them. I'd love to hear from you though, like if you were going to talk to an engineer about like why coming to do AI here at Fractional is going to teach you like more than going somewhere else, like what would be that answer? Like what would you tell them?
And we see so many very cool, real, interesting, valuable projects that AI is at the center of here in a way that very few people do. Like you get to come here and actually build something valuable in the world that you know ahead of time. Like you're not in this product market fit seeking exercise of like, if I build this, does anybody want it? You're like, a company wants to pay us to automate this painful process for them today, but it's really, really hard. And oftentimes to go get those projects, first of all, you'd usually get to only work on one of them, right? Like if you're going to go work for a company that has that problem, you'd be working on that problem for the next 5 years. You wouldn't be like, get to sample multiple of them. But two, you usually have to go to a company you don't want to work at. Like, do I want to build the next generation AI customer support phone agent thing for United Airlines? Yes. Do I want to go work at United Airlines? Yeah. Definitely. And so being able to work on like their coolest, hardest problem from a startup environment surrounded by other brilliant people and get to do sort of like a survey of those things over your career, I think is a really powerful thing. And we also like, you don't have to already be an expert in it. Like most of the people that get to work on this stuff, you need to have some existing expertise. This is the place where we do expect you to be a super strong engineer. The people on our team are all like ex-founders, ex-engineering leaders, people with 10 to 25 years of experience. They've done really incredible things, but most of them came in with no AI experience and they're sort of learning on the job. And so it's a really powerful way to kind of learn the kinds of applied AI skills that can then be valuable anywhere else.
Yeah, that's so cool. That's a great opportunity.
I have so many questions about Fractional and your world through the lens of engineers. But before we jump into some of those, Fractional obviously isn't your first rodeo, right? You talked about having built numerous previous startups. What keeps you coming back? And what are you kind of wanting to accomplish with Fractional? It's different than what you've accomplished before.
Well, one is I think there's like an opportunity to build like a $100 billion plus company here. And so that's definitely part of it, is want to build some really massive, enduring, unforgettable thing. And I don't think I've done that. I've been in startup land for a while. I've had varying degrees of success. I haven't had any success at that magnitude. And so definitely want to take a run at that. Another is that like I've always been very motivated by building the kinds of teams that I want to work on. Like I really love working at places where I'm like surrounded by people that are brilliant, that are impressive, that are deeply technical, that I get along with, that are also nice, sort of low ego.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate enough to actually have experienced that at LiveRamp, and that sort of taught me how to value that. But I think apart from LiveRamp, like I found that really hard to find again. Like
Yeah.
a lot of places don't have that. And trying to build it myself, I found very fulfilling. An interesting thing about this time around though is that like in the past, it's always just been like my own motivation that drove that. Like I do think that Wove had a really talented team, and we built a talented team because I thought it was important to build a talented team for a lot of reasons. This is the first time where like actually the business like really, really needs that. Like this company won't work if we don't build a really talented team. And that has been really fun for me. Like there's like an actual feedback mechanism for that now instead of just my force of will.
Yeah.
And that's been really nice. And I think that also shows in the team, like where everybody is working around the clock to build the incredible team because we know how important it is to success in the company, and that's actually bearing fruit, and you can see it in the caliber of the team.
Yeah. So I'm curious, the types of companies that you've worked on before, obviously it's so different than what Fractional is. I think a lot of it's just different in the market. And I think that's so cool and refreshing. What experiences from like those early days at LiveRamp have helped you as you're kind of building the team over at Fractional now? Like what are some of the lessons I guess that you're drawing on to do that now?
I think you have to have worked with a really stellar team in order to like one of the hardest parts about building a stellar team is like keeping your bar while you're going through the process of building it.
Yeah.
Like it's very easy to sit there in a vacuum and be like, it's important to like build a great place full of great people. And then it's very different when you're like interviewing someone that seems pretty good.
Yeah.
Or like you're unsure, or you're going through like interviews are so imperfect, right?
Yeah.
You're like reading tea leaves the whole time. And when you're in that process, especially when you have aggressive hiring targets and it's the bottleneck for the growth of your business. I mean, here, like the thing that's preventing the business from being larger is our hiring.
Yeah.
It's the side of things, right? Like we have more business than, the current team can deal with. And so, of course, it'd be like very easy and natural for me to be like, that person seems good enough. I can find a place for them to add value here.
Yeah.
And I think without having worked on an amazing team with discipline around how to sort of like keep the bar held high, it's really hard to know how to do that. In some ways, like the hardest part of hiring is like it's actually that you know it when you see it, and then when you're not seeing it, reminding yourself that you're not seeing it.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do.
Yeah.
It must be so easy, especially being in the business of the more engineers equals more business, right? I mean, there's a very direct correlation to that, right? That must be a very hard thing to do to maintain that bar.
Yeah. I mean, long term, we won't succeed if we like lower the bar, right? But short term, we certainly will. Like short term, if we're like, oh, we could like literally just make more money now by saying yes to hiring this person. And so, yeah, you have to stay very attuned to the long term and trying to build the right thing over time. Luckily, I have very supportive co-founders and partners around me that understand this. Because sometimes I do feel like, they have to sort of rely on my technical lens, and I'm looking at people. I'm like, I think this person does or doesn't have it. And they're like, all right, we'll take your word for it. Because if they're not technical themselves, how are they going to see that? And so I'm very fortunate to have people around me that also get it and are long-term thinkers and have the trust in me to sort of believe me when I say it.
And I'm sure everyone will appreciate that dividend, right? As it plays through.
Oh yeah. And like, it's also, one of the biggest sort of ways to get this to work is like now the team is small, but like the caliber is sort of undeniable. And so when you see it actually like working out in practice, that's definitely the ammo you need. I think this would be a very different story if I was like, no, trust me, like we should hold this really high bar, and then the team around me kind of sucked. I don't think I would get a lot of trust then.
So there's a lot of kind of mission alignment there, right? The name of our company is called First 10 because we believe that there's nothing more important to the success of a startup than the first 10 engineers that they hire. So tell us about the quality of your team. What is this kind of bar that you hold new engineering talent to? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So the folks we're trying to hire, I mean, really what we're trying to figure out is like if we visualize them being on one of these projects that we do, if you're asked to go own end to end this ambiguous, challenging kind of, project that we get from our customers, like do we think it's going to result in success or not? And that's like a many faceted thing that we're looking at, and it's not just one thing. Especially when you take into consideration the fact that like the best fits are actually going to be sort of lopsided in some way, right? They're going to have like spiky strengths where they're, a 10 out of 10 on something, and people nobody's 10 out of 10 on everything. And so you're trying to figure out like, does this configuration of this person's sort of spikes and sort of like, less strong areas, do they result in something that I think is going to be a success? And so we try and design our interview process around just like simulating the job, basically. If we just sit down and we build something from scratch together that stretches your understanding of a problem that's kind of hard to think about, what do you do? Like, can you actually like deliver something, especially if you have not a ton of guidance? You're given sort of customer level or product level understanding of what we're trying to accomplish, but no one's sitting there telling you like in great detail, like here are the exact specs for this thing. can you thrive in that environment? And most people cannot. And so we're trying to kind of observe that. Now, one of the things that makes that extra tricky is that like a thing that we can't really do much about is that we're also doing it in an interview setting.
Yeah.
And so like, they're under pressure and we know that. And so we're trying to like sort of like give them leeway and be like, okay, what do we think would happen if they're actually not in an interview setting and on the job? There's some things we can do to control for that. Like we try and let them use their own environment. They show up with their own tools, their own IDE. We let them, use AI tools and do Google searches. And we try and prepare them ahead of time for, this is not some game with some rubric. This is like us sitting down trying to write a program together. But ultimately, they're in an interview setting, and it makes it very hard to read. So that's the sort of high level how I'm thinking about interviews when we're going through it. And then at the end, I'm like, did this person impress me in some way? Yeah. Can I picture sitting next to this person every day and then being like, wow, I'm really proud to go into this office? And that's like a pretty high bar. That means people that are otherwise good might not hit the bar on that dimension.
Yeah.
And I recognize it's fuzzy for me to say that. And I think it is fuzzy, but we're actually flexible about what that looks like. Like there's many different ways to be impressive. In fact, I think no two people on our team are like impressive in the same way, but every one of them I'm like very proud to work with. And I think that showed in some way on the interview process somehow.
I'd love to know a little bit more about the culture at Fractional and kind of, what's it like there? I
always struggle with this one because I feel like culture is like,
how do you define that?
You feel culture.
Yeah.
So I think a common thread throughout this business is we're very impacted by the fact that we do project work.
Yeah.
We're a professional services business, right? We're building custom bespoke software for our customers, and every customer is a little different. Every project is a little different. And so we end up being pretty customer centric in that we sort of like spontaneously organize around whatever project needs at any given time. So like on average, our teams are like 2 engineers and a product person with some support from random folks around the org. And we're like laser focused on whatever individual project we're working on at any given time. And so as an engineer, you're only ever working on one thing at any given time. I'm spread across projects. There are people on the company spread across projects, but their engineers are working on one thing at once. And so their life tends to be organized around like, what client am I serving right now? What do they need?
Yeah.
Et cetera. And we tend to, even though we're building, pretty complicated engineering projects and we're thinking a lot about AI all day, we take a pretty customer first view of things. Like I think I've been at some companies before where like the technical details are what rule. Here, I think what the customer needs is what rules. And then we also go down these like sort of nerdy side paths where we kind of geek out about the technical stuff because we're using AI. This is like never ending nerd snipe territory. We could talk about this stuff all day long. There's a lot of AI talk around the office.
Yeah.
We do these like weekly project lunches where the idea of them is supposed to be like you pick a project a week and then someone goes and deep dives into what's going on in their project and they share it with the rest of the team. And then by the end, it's all us just sort of like nerding out about AI in some way, talking about AI philosophy or try some new tool we tried out. And so there's a lot of that as well.
That's fun.
As you're describing that, I could picture it. And I would imagine that, one thing I'm curious about is you talk about being open to bringing people in that don't necessarily have AI experience. How does it go from like day one with no AI experience to like what you just described, which is like immersed, right?
That's a good question. This is definitely an area where we've evolved over time. Like, I think the initial kind of set of first principles here was like, doesn't make sense to go hire someone with 10 years of Gen AI experience. Gen AI is not 10 years old, not in the form we are thinking of when we talk about it. And when we encounter these projects, we're generally the first people to have thought about what we're doing or close to it. And so the skill set here is much more like, how do you operate in ambiguity? How do you have a generalist skill set? How do you have a broad array of experiences to pattern match a broad set of stuff too? I still stand by all that. But then when we like started at the very beginning, we just like plunge headfirst into these projects and like people were not always like equipped. The learning curve is steep, especially when you're learning to also help like sort of manage thinking about what clients need. That's also a separate sort of thing you're learning at the same time. So we've evolved a ton on that front. So first of all, we like have a series of orientations that are like designed to kind of give you the sort of quick boot camp on like the stuff that you can learn quickly.
Okay.
But then what we like to do is when you first join the company, we have you do like an apprenticeship project where we pair you with somebody that is already running a project that's well underway. And then we don't bill the client for your time usually.
Okay.
And so what this results in is like a great win-win. You like are not owning a full thing end to end. You're still trying to figure out how to deliver for a client, but it's not with the pressure of like, great, you own this thing you don't understand. Like I'll come back later and we'll see if it's great.
Yeah.
Instead, you get some set of training wheels. You get to sit next to somebody that knows this really well, and you get to learn the best practices from them. And then the client views it as just like over delivering. We just gave them extra free resources we're not charging for, and it lets us tackle this sort of long tail of stuff that we normally wouldn't have gotten to.
Yeah.
And the project loves it, the client loves it. It can really set you up for success, and then you feel really good about like transitioning into actually owning a project from the start after that.
So that person must feel like a total kid in a candy store, right? Just being fully immersed into this world, right?
We also invest a lot in making sure there's a lot of communication between projects. Like part of my job is to see across all these projects and to make sure I'm like all day, I'm like, oh, cool, you're encountering this thing. Someone else encounters something like that. You should make sure you talk to them about this. Or yeah, I've seen a similar thing on another project. And we do these, I mentioned the project lunches internally. We've sort of evolved that practice over time and do more and more of them. Goal being like, yeah, you need to, it's hard to be spread between more than one project and to be able to give it all of your attention. So we do want you to like be on one project at once. But then once you're on that project, tunnel vision is like the last thing we want. And so we got to facilitate all this sort of cross-pollination between things so that, you know, you can be benefiting from everybody else's experience in the team. We also have this just company value of overusing AI. Like our value comes from being on the forefront of using new tools and having seen projects many times and be able to pattern match between them. And so we're like very willing to invest in like buying new tools and giving you time to like get up to speed on them and try them out. And you should be doing that enough to the point where like sometimes it was a waste of time and that's fine. And like the answer was that was the wrong tool for the job. There's a lot of kind of like room for experimentation and playing around that I think people find fun and interesting and help support them in their project work.
Fun. So, something I'm curious about that I think the world is similarly curious about. You guys have such an immersive view of what's going on with AI across such a broad range of companies, right? From startups to tech companies to bigger tech companies to non-tech companies, right? What is going on with AI at these companies? What are some misconceptions? Is it not on their radar? Are they dabbling? Are they like all in? Like, what could we expect to see over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think like earlier this year, there was a lot of like people that are like, we should demonstrate that we are doing something AI and without a ton of substance behind it sometimes. And then now we feel like we're in a different phase. Like we see substance all day long. It's like real companies of all types are figuring out how to get leverage from AI in their business. That looks a few different ways, but the kinds of things we like to see, like the way we think about the core sort of new functionality that's available is mostly that computers can now read, write, and make like simple, basic decisions across a crazy amount of domains. And that unlocks a lot of things. The kinds of things that unlocks is usually like freeing up people from doing those things.
Yeah.
So places where people are doing basic reading, writing, rote decisions are now open for technology in a way they weren't before. And sometimes that looks like grunt work that's happening at companies they don't want to do anymore, you know, pushing around paperwork and things like that. Sometimes it looks like entirely new workflows that weren't possible before because you couldn't scale out large enough to do it. Other times it looks like new product features that are freeing their customers up to do that sort of thing. So like, you know, we did a project recently that was like automating the building of API integrations. And that looks like a product feature, like they're releasing it to their customers, but that's because their customers were spending lots of time building new API integrations, and it was like sort of a manual process. They'd have to loop engineers in to do it. Engineers didn't like doing it. Now they don't really have to. Sometimes it looks more like that revenue cycle example, or like we did a content moderation project recently where like there was a team of people that found themselves in this position where they're working for this social media platform, and they've got to go in and review a bunch of content by hand every day and determine like, does this violate our terms? Does not violate our terms? That's a pretty natural language-ish kind of thing that was like not really available to computers, 5 years ago, at least would have been much, much, much harder, probably not worth the effort. And now that unlocks this whole automation opportunity. I think there's little pockets of that all over the place. And one thing I've learned in this business is that you can't always predict ahead of time like what those use cases look like. Like, you know, people ask us early on, like, do you have specific verticals, you're focused on? And nowhere on my bingo card was like 150-year-old farm equipment manufacturer trying to do this like, information extraction process over old like oil stained manuals that are on their factory floor. Like that, I didn't know that was a thing. Like, I guess I know it's a thing now. Yeah. And it's a lot of that.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought that either, to be. Yeah. That's awesome. Out of curiosity, like how long, like what's the average length for time to like develop a project like end to end? Like months, a year?
Shortest one is probably like 8 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. The longer ones are years.
Gotcha.
Like we're midstream on a multi-year long thing right now, or a year plus long thing right now.
Yeah.
They really run the gamut. Also, like the longer it gets, the more the sort of lines blur between what a project is. Like I think a good way to tackle an AI project with a big vision is often to find some small start and sort of prove that it's doable and expand from there. You don't start by trying to like do every single American Airlines customer service request. You go, what is the highest volume of requests that require the most like sort of rote effort? You use that to sort of prove out a use case.
Yeah.
It's very tricky to get these things working in a real production environment, right? It's not just getting a voice bot that can say the right thing sometimes.
Yeah.
It's got to say the right thing every time, even against an adversarial user. It's got to know when to escalate to a human. It's got to work at crazy scale. The amount of edge cases is really large. And so starting with something small and then being able to sort of like incrementally chip away at the broader problem, where would you draw a line around what a project is there? So oftentimes the projects we're the most interested in are ones that have like transformative potential, where like if we succeed, you can change the economics of a business at some core level. And those projects, I think, take time and they expand over time.
Yeah. So I don't know, something that you just said, I was thinking of it. So I read in one of the blogs that's actually out on Fractional AI, you talk about focusing on picking the right model when thinking about AI projects is a mistake. I'm curious what makes you say that, and what should startup founders or anybody that's like focused on AI, like what should they focus on instead?
Yeah, so I think model choice is definitely a thing. I think it just happens to be an area where there's a lot of preconceived notions and a lot of sort of misconceptions that make it so that it's harder for someone to start on a project.
Yeah.
At some base level, an AI automation project is just an engineering project.
Yeah.
You do need to make a decision about what programming language to use. It's not the most salient thing about the project. And if you design your project the way we recommend, which is very first thing you do in the project is you try and get to a place where you have end-to-end evals in place. And what I mean by evals is essentially like an automated test suite that's measuring how well you're doing at any given time. Like you need that for all sorts of reasons. You need that to be able to tell you how well you're doing. You need that to be able to sort of guide the development process. Like it will surface anecdotes where your system is performing poorly. You can go like, oh, hey, I'm like working on this content moderation project. Like I got the answers wrong 30% of the time. What are the ones I'm getting wrong? Okay, it's getting this type of stuff wrong. Let me go adjust my system to get better at these sorts of things. If you build that pipeline out that way and you have evals designed, it becomes like fairly easy to test what happens if I change to a different model.
Mm-hmm.
There's some nuance there. You may like adjust your prompts to adapt to what model you're using. You may change your architecture slightly based on the model. Different models they're good at different things and they're sort of addressed in different ways. Sometimes it should become fairly straightforward to like somewhere along the way, you test a bunch of different models and you see which one performs well. And like, it's very common for us to have a solution where we start off just using OpenAI's models because it's kind of easy. And then we like test Anthropic models in multiple steps. And then like one of the steps of our pipeline uses Anthropic for one thing because it seems to perform better there. In practice, we rarely end up using open source models because they, I think, typically perform a little worse, if not maybe the same. And then you got to worry about deployment and where do you go host this thing and manage this thing. And like, there's a whole can of worms you open, which are not spending your core time thinking about like, how do I actually build a reliable system here? How do I get done what I want to get done? How do I coax this model into producing the right output? And so those are much, much harder things.
Yeah.
And I think people start off like sort of misconceptions. When someone says like, I want to build a system based on this model, my first question is why?
Yeah.
I think the why is often like, I'm not really sure. Like essentially boils down to like, I've sort of read good things, or a lot of people have beliefs around, I have extreme data security requirements. I have to self-host some model. And, I can't let any data be used to train the model. They don't realize that like OpenAI out of the box actually gives you the promise that they're not training on your data.
Yeah.
Or like, if you really have this requirement, you can go like access Claude's model through Bedrock in your AWS account, and then it's never leaving your AWS account. So the like sort of core reasons, not always, but often they don't hold up when you kind of go through this process. And instead, like you should be spending like 90-something% of your effort thinking about things that are not about model selection.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
You made me think of something as you're talking about models. So models are advancing at such a rapid pace, right? Given the resources that are invested in them. What will existing models be able to do, that startups currently do that, will likely not exist? Like what AI startups will survive and what models will kind of just blow through?
Yeah, it's very hard for me to predict who is going to win and who's going to lose in startup land. I think when you're looking at like, there's a sort of separation here between like tools that are used to build AI solutions and AI solutions themselves, right? So AI solutions are like something verticalized, like I want to build the AI powered revenue cycle management company. The other category is like, I want to build OpenAI, or I want to build blend. They make like a AI phone agent sort of layer that can be used to build other AI phone agents on top of them. So it's like the sort of dev tools-ish pieces of the stack, and then there's like sort of verticalized solutions. On the verticalized solutions, I find it impossible to pick winners. It's like you pick any given industry and it's hard to tell, like, are the incumbents going to move fast enough to actually be able to win here? And do they have a strong enough advantage? Or, maybe they won't move fast enough, but maybe private equity will buy them and then private equity will win. Or maybe like even that will fail. And then like the new startup engine will figure out how to chip away at their market share. I think like it's really hard to tell. On the tooling side, I think the tooling is just like getting better and better, and it enables us to move faster and faster. Ultimately, like, just because you have good AI phone agent software does not mean that like you're turnkey for United Airlines. I feel like maybe every time I've given this example, I picked a different airline, but whatever. Getting to something that works end to end for United in production is a lot more than picking an off the shelf tool. But the off the shelf tools are getting better and they're important. And I think they're going to definitely take a slice of the sort of money that's being spent here. But beyond that, it's very hard for me to actually pick winners and losers here. I would be wary of being an AI company selling AI stuff to other AI companies right now. We try and limit ourselves, like, of course, like in this kind of hypey environment, like there's going to be certain companies that are like, they have budget to demonstrate that they're doing something AI. And like, if you really get, critical under the hood of like, is there true user value at the end of this whole chain? There's a question mark attached to it. We really try and limit the amount of that business we do. I mean, we'll do some of it because it's natural and it helps us sort of grow. But the use cases we really like are like the company's been doing something for 50 years and now they don't have to do anymore, which feels like it has much more enduring value. If you are an AI company whose customers are other AI companies, you have to assume that over time, like some degree of air is going to get let out of the bubble. And I would worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That tracks.
So another reference to the blog. Seriously, anybody listening to this, they should go read the blog. It's really cool. But you discussed how LLMs are changing the hiring landscape. And curious from my own perspective, like as AI tools become more powerful, what skills do you think will become even more crucial for engineers to develop, especially in context of Fractional too? If they wanted to come work for Fractional, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah. Well, so I think a thing that's on the top of a lot of people's minds is like, where do we put AI into the interview process or not? We had to think pretty deeply about that when we started the company, because on the one hand, like you do want to be testing people's sort of raw engineering skills and capabilities, but on the other hand, like the nature of what it means to be a software engineer these days, it's like you get a lot of leverage out of using AI tools. And I would view it as pretty problematic if someone joined here and then like, couldn't get any leverage out of using an AI tool. And you also want the interview process to feel kind of natural, and like you want the candidate to feel comfortable. Nothing worse than being like, yelled at because the code you wrote on a whiteboard doesn't compile. And this feels like the same thing. It's like I'm being asked to like program in this constrained environment. And like normally what I do is I ask AI.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is that interview questions are the kinds of questions that LLMs are disproportionately good at solving.
Yeah.
In my day-to-day job, when I'm programming, I find Copilot very helpful. I find asking ChatGPT like sometimes helpful, but like I'd probably throw out 75% of what it does because it can't actually grok my full big problem, or isn't actually good at solving the really hard parts. In an interview setting, the nature of the beast is that you're being given a problem that can be described to you in the time window of an interview.
Yeah,
it's self-contained in some way, and that self-contained problem, the LLMs are disproportionately good at solving. And so what we do is we tell candidates, like, feel free to use AI tools here. We ask them to turn off the proactive autocomplete style of AI.
Right.
So like Copilot or things like that. But they're allowed to go prompt the AI themselves. And the reason for that is like, we want to be able to see when you're making an active decision versus when you're making a passive one. We're not trying to like sort of handcuff you, but like, we are sort of wondering like, oh, this thing just wrote all the code for you without you asking for it. Did you even think about it? Like, did you even think about that? Or did the computer just know it ahead of time?
Yeah.
So that is sort of where we decided to draw the line, but I think others draw it in other places. The flip side of that is that candidates have a pretty varied set of experiences in terms of like how effectively they are able to use these tools. And a lot of that boils down to where they worked last, right? If they just didn't have a job and they were like working on side projects at home or something, and probably using AI for stuff, or at least I would hope so. I would suggest if you're out there in that situation that you try using AI. If they just worked at a startup, they probably are using AI. But like, I don't know, if you worked at like some big healthcare company that like didn't, had a policy of like no AI tools, or you worked at Google and like you're only allowed to use Google's AI tools, and like you have this very sort of biased view of like what the tool set is that's out there, that's not really your fault. And like what I'd want to be testing in that case is like, how adaptable are you? And like, do I believe that if you joined here pretty quickly, you'd learn new tools? So I think it presents sort of challenges and opportunities from both the candidate's perspective and the interviewer's perspective. But it does give certain people superpowers. Another area where we try and like at least give some thought is like if a candidate worked at an AI company before. Okay, on the one hand, that's like demonstrates AI enthusiasm in some way, which is nice. On the other hand, they have like a leg up that probably will like diminish within their first, few weeks to a month on the job. And so like don't want to over-index on like the experience they had at this other AI company.
Yeah.
And so we try and hold them to a slightly higher bar in terms of like, how familiar we expect them to be with certain tools. But in our interviews, we generally encourage people to like, even when they're encountering AI specific questions we're asking, we encourage them to just think about it like an engineering problem. Don't think about it as some magic AI quiz that, you haven't studied for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So continuing along that thought, so we speak with so many different engineers, some that are immersed in AI, some that are on the other end of the spectrum where they're like, I've heard of this thing, but maybe I've asked ChatGPT a couple questions, right? So what advice would you give to the average engineer, given your immersive kind of nature in AI and where you kind of see AI going?
I mean, if you want to develop these skills, I think my advice is just force yourself to reach for it more, and then the rest will happen pretty naturally. Like you have to build the muscle of like, you need to know to reach for it. An easy place to start is like, see how little you can Google search. Like try and make your new default Google to be OpenAI and be ChatGPT. Another is like turn on all the AI features in your IDE, get Copilot. The JetBrains one is like not so great, but like you could use Cursor or one of the alternatives and just turn it all on and try and use it and try and challenge yourself to use it more and more. Those would be the quickest ways, I think, to like just sort of start to build the muscle. Just start reaching for it more and more and more. The more you do that, I think you'll like eventually bump up against like, wow, I really wish I could use XYZ. And then you'll know to sort of Google search for the next tool that could potentially like help you with that thing.
Your recommendation, if you're not into it,
yes,
get into it.
Do it.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it feels to me right now as a developer, like if you have the option to use Copilot and you're not, or you have the option to use something like Cursor or similar and you're not, you're like effectively opting to use like, it's like choosing to use like Vim with no syntax highlighting and like no plugins, nothing is turned on, and then like wondering why you're like half as productive. Whereas like, there's ways to make Vim productive for you. This is not to trash talk Vim, but like I would not program right now in, Microsoft Notepad. I would use some like tooling to make myself faster. It feels like we're pretty much there with something like Copilot.
Right. Cool. Eddie, anything that we missed asking you? Anything that you really wish you had the opportunity to chat about, but didn't have that chance?
Nothing really jumps to mind. I think we like covered a lot of different things.
Oh yeah, all kinds of topics. That's fun.
Yeah,
I think so too. This felt pretty productive. I felt like we could have definitely gone down some more rabbit holes, but it was really cool to hear your view of the world, given what you have seen and see as it relates to AI.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate to be able to like actually work on these kinds of problems every day. I think there's very few pockets where you can work on kind of trendy, new, interesting things that are also like deeply valuable in a way that you can understand is valuable.
Yeah.
Like it's a lot less speculative whether this is valuable. We have folks on our team that are like very, very experienced, very seasoned. And I think one of the things that appeals to them is they're just like, I've done the thing a few times of like, going to an early stage company and like wondering, is there ever going to be a there? And can we find our way to building something that people want? And there's something nice about it being like a little more baked into the premise.
Yeah.
That, like, I'm working on this because someone has expressed that it is valuable. And like, it's still hard. There's still risk here. We're still an early stage startup. I don't want to declare victory at this stage, but the kind of like the premise involving that someone already kind of has raised their hand and said like, this is a thing that actually is valuable to us. And you can sort of see where that value comes from. It's an interesting set of ingredients to mix with like AI and being on the forefront, being able to play with new things. Like those two things existing in the same spot are pretty remarkable. I feel pretty fortunate to be able to come in and work on them every day.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
I love that. So Eddie, where can people reach you? Who do you want to hear from? What should their first message to you be?
Well, I mean, the first and foremost, the most important thing to us is hiring other great team members. So if you or someone you know is an engineer that's interested in working on these kinds of things, please reach out to me. You can come to our website, fractional.ai. Would absolutely love to hear from you. In fact, that's the only thing I'm going to plug. So that's fine. That's what I want. I want to meet other smart engineers that are interested in working on real valuable AI projects, and I want to talk to you.
Awesome.
Love that. Well, thank you again, Eddie, for joining us. We really certainly appreciated getting a glimpse of the world from your lens, and I'm sure our wonderful world of engineers and founders and investors who listen were appreciating that as well. So thanks again, and keep building what you're building. We're excited to cheer from the sidelines to see how this whole wonderful world of AI turns out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eddie. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Do let us know what you thought of our episode on our Twitter or LinkedIn. Look for the links in the show notes. Both Alexis and I are not professional podcasters, as I'm sure you could tell. We just love talking about early stage startups.
And if there's a recruiting related question you'd like answered, or you could use help with anything hiring related, jump on our website. It's www.first10.com. That's 1st10.com. And we'll do our best to get that answered for you.
Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. My name is Boris, and with me is
Alexis Munger.
And we'll see you next time on the First 10 Podcast.
Bye.